don't know about the meaning crisis. Left, right, black, white, or other vices. But Jesus Christ is right. Forever all saved. From my perspective, proposition procedurally running. Participate procedurally running a circle. Remember, everybody, we're in the age of decay. Symbolically speaking, the reapers are reaping, and neighbor doors are whispering and squeaking. We're all in pursuit of the valley of the bee. Red pill, blue pill, red pill, mushroom, venom tea. We're red and peel, got one and number two. We're all the same damn thing. So clean your room, repent on sin. Ontology is dummy, the bird's eye view. And if you really knew, could you really say? Red pill, yeah. All right. I think I should be done with that because my fingers are
all my
being
fingers and
bitches.
toes.
Straight up bitches.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is the Friday. I might rename it to the Friday Randos Estuary live stream, something like that. It'll continue to evolve. I just finished watching Kale's excellent Underneath on Kayfabe and Play. That's a competitor for a video I might make this afternoon, but we will see. We have a really excellent group today for our sort of Randos Estuary conversation. Maybe I'll bring them in the order that I've met them. Oh, can't be met them in person because Sherry I met online. Sherry was a very early rando. And thank you, Sherry. Thank you for coming this morning. Anything you want to say to introduce yourself to a group that pretty much already knows you?
Yeah. Well, my name is Sherry. I live in Canada. Been living on this farm for 25 years now. We moved here in 2000. So
Wow.
Time is marching.
Where's the dog? The dog's usually sitting behind you, or sometimes the cat.
Yeah, well, the weather is better, so
oh, they're outside. All right.
Yeah.
And the next person also probably needs no introduction. He actually has two things here. I love that. I love that. T-shirts are underwear. I like that. Griswold Grimm, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Grim Grizz. Once upon a time, I was a regular human like you, and then I went into the internet and stayed there and turned into this. I've resurfaced to try and warn you and save you all from a fate like my own.
All right. He is our original cautionary tale. And another fella that I just met when I was in the UK, he came to the wonderful dinner hosted by our own Ups, and that is Peter Penrose Bach, otherwise known as Justin. Good morning.
Yes. Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I've just been rushing around, but I got here just about on time.
All right.
Nice to meet you, General. President Correct on deck. And Chari, we've spoken.
Yes. Yeah. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you
How
too.
would you like to introduce yourself to those who perhaps are seeing you for the first time?
Okay, so I'm a northerner. So from north of England. I grew up. My Irish family are Catholics from Tipperary, and my dad's family are from India. But it's even more complicated than that. My family name is Scottish. My paternal great-great-grandfather went over to India with the Empire, and then he intermingled. And my grandmother is from India. She's Indian. And yeah, I worked in industry in like process infrastructure, global infrastructure out of university, and then I got bored of that and became a sailor. And then I did that for another 10 years, and then I came back to the UK about 10 years ago, and I went back into industry, and now I'm just sort of semi-retired.
All right. All right. Yeah. And he's got a lot of great stories. I sat across the table from him at that dinner and really anxious, really excited to hear what he's going to bring to the table this morning. And we have a couple of new faces, although not necessarily new to the comments section. Terry Murphy, welcome.
Hi there.
Tell
I
us,
am so excited to be here.
I'm so glad you grabbed a slot. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, first of all, you and I first crossed paths at a Rebel Wisdom event with Paul Kingsnorth. And afterward, you made mock of me publicly for the question that I asked Paul. So it's all right, I forgive you, but that's how we met.
You are a generous person. Thank you for your forgiveness. And thank
and
you so much. Keep going.
My claim to fame here is that I belong to two churches with opposing worldviews, both of whom think I'm crazy, if not worse. One is I've had 40 years in a New Thought metaphysical congregation that believes in God as an impersonal force we interact with through our thoughts. And the other is an all-black biblical literalist church where the praise music goes through the roof. And when I first walked in, I said, these people have something I want. It makes no sense because their theology seems wrong, bad, evil, what have you. So I spent 2 years exploring that and never really stopped.
Wow, you are very TLC. You are very TLC. So thank you.
One
Go
more
ahead.
addition to that, when Rebel Wisdom gave up their online community, I was one of who volunteered to take it over, Emergent Commons. So you may have also met some of my fellows from Emergent Commons, like
Yes.
Zach Parsons or Mari Budlong in Washington State.
Yep. Wow. Very interesting. All right. So welcome, Terry, and thank you for coming on. I'm so excited this is going to be a very interesting group today. And last but not least, Roy, him, her. Roy, welcome.
Thank you, Paul.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, you wouldn't have any reason to remember me, but I dragged my lovely bride to Thunder Bay when the conference was held there. And I was bold enough to drag her up and introduce her to you and point out that you were the primary competitor for my attention since way back when you were interpreting Jordan Peterson for me. And I've loved ever since how you translate big brain ideas down to something I can fit into my little corner.
Well, given that I am the primary competitive with your wife, I am super glad you're using your pronouns, because if they were otherwise, I don't know, that might make me a little nervous. So welcome, Roy. This is awesome. So we have some veterans and some new people here, and the way we play the Estuary game, our little Hollywood Squares TV game show, is this: we've just done the introductions, and then we will pitch an idea to the group. It can be an intellectual idea, it can be a contextual idea, it can be a personal thing you've been chewing on, it can be an estuarial thing, it could just be something that you just haven't been able to get out of your mind for the last few days or weeks, and you want to share it with the group and throw that on the table, and maybe others will pick it up. And then the third round is point to an idea that someone else has shared with the group, and tell us why that caught your attention. And it's okay. Last week we talked about the weave a bit. It's okay to weave it into other ideas that have been shared, but it's nice if you give me a little bit of a salience hierarchy so I can sort of count the votes as we go through the points, and then help get the group going on the conversation, and the conversation will go where it wills. Are there any questions about the estuary protocol? We're good to go. Now, the reason I actually arranged the squares in this way is because I've got the veterans up first who have known this and done this for a little while, and then this gives some of the new people a chance to do things. Now, I have the glass company. I arranged for them to come this afternoon, and the dude called me right before I started and said, I'll be there in about 10 minutes. I said, you were supposed to be here this afternoon. And he's like, no, I'll be here. So if I disappear, y'all got to handle the conversation without me. But I just have to make sure that, somebody decided they wanted to break into our estuary room. And they rummaged through my hat and my glasses, my Freddie Bling wrapper stuff. But other than that, they just left a bunch of broken glass. So I got to get that fixed. Sherry, what would you like to pitch this morning?
Oh, I've been ruminating on that. I'm broken record when it comes to subjects. Pretty much.
Not unusual in the corner.
Yeah. No, that's a thing. So I think a lot about metaphor. I know that's a wide-ranging subject, but I think metaphor is how we carry meaning across to other people. And so I think about it in terms of storytelling. But I also think about the fact that we're in a so-called meaning crisis. Like, this is what the corner is, how we, fumbled and stumbled into one another. And then I think about how when people are having conversations, which is what this platform is about, right? Most of the time they're trying to figure out what the other person means. They're asking the question, "What do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean?" Right? So they're using language, they're having conversation, but meaning is the most difficult thing to convey. And so I keep asking myself, if we're in a meaning crisis and we actually never really know what the other person means, how do we solve it? So there you go.
Okay. All right. The glass truck is there. The dude hasn't emerged, but I'll just keep my eye on the stuff. When I look this way, I'm just looking at the security cameras. So, all right. Meaning, Grim Grizz, what would you like to pitch to the group?
I'm trying to gauge whether or not it is the case that those who identify as Christian have cognitive dissonance in getting behind paintball for Jesus and rescuing adolescent youth from a disembodied existence, because doing so would force them to confront their own relationship with screen time.
Grim Grizz. All right. Justin, what would you like to pitch?
Well, I've got an idea and it might fall flat on its face. But what I'd like to do is pose the question, but I want to pose the question in the context of a story. So I'll tell the story and then I'll ask the question. Okay. So my grandmother from India, she used to summon me around to the house on a Saturday morning, and I'd have to sit in the drawing room and wait for her. And she came in this day and she said, "Justin, I was thinking this week about my grandfather from Kashmir." And I said to her, "Oh, you mean your mother's father?" And she said, "Yes, you remember. Very good." I said, "Okay, what was he telling you? What were you doing?" And she said, he sat me down and he said to me, "Olive," because that was my grandmother's name. He said to me, "Olive, it occurs to me there's two types of people in this life, two and only two. And do you know what I was doing, Justin, at that moment?" And I said, "You were fidgeting, weren't you?" She said, "Yes, I was fidgeting." Why was I fidgeting? And I said to her, "Because surely there's more than two types of people in this world." She said, "That's what I thought." But then he told me the story. And he said to me, "There's two types of people in this world, Olive. Two and only two. There are those that are always talking about you, more than to you. Do you know those people, Olive?" And she said, "Yeah, I do." She said, "And then there's the second type of person. And that type of person is the person that simply talks to you. But here's the question, and it's not a quiz. Which one of them are you?" And the question, that's the story, and the question is, what is prayer? And what role does the story play in prayer?
Wow. Very good. Thank you, Justin. Terry, what would you like to pitch to the group?
Well, I have been following Jordan Hall religiously for the last year, and I'm kind of blown away in ways I can only barely get my arms around, because it seems like he's, on the one hand, speaking for and defending a very specific kind of Christianity as the right way. But on the other hand, he's expressing from a place that just feels so open, so universal, so evolutionary. And so my struggle for myself, and as I watch him, is how to hold those two opposites. How does he get so darn good at it? How do I get better at it? And what is
Because
it?
you're going to both churches. I love it. Thank you, Terry. Roy, what would you like to pitch to the group?
So, 11 years ago, I turned in my license to practice engineering, and I retrained and refocused, and I've been doing construction dispute settlement, which has opened up the whole area of lawyers and the rule of law and what is justice. And it's been very refreshing for me to be a student again. The topic out of that uh, transition that I'm currently obsessed with and stuck on is willful blindness. Because by the time they're willing to pay me to settle their dispute, at least one of them, and sometimes both of them, both parties, have immersed themselves in a very high level of willful blindness. And another aspect of my current focus is how systems become corrupt. And so I'm typically would expand the narrow scope of um, construction disputes to imagine that we become collectively wise through collectively surrendering our willful blindness. How can we possibly do that?
All right. Wow. Given the smorgasbord of excellent pitches on the table, I will pass as usual. And Sherry, what would you like to point to? You have to unmute, though. Ears of corn and all.
Sorry. I was going to ask him if he could reiterate his pitch, because somehow I missed the thrust of it. So I just want to be fair and hear that again.
Is that a violation of protocol?
I will allow it.
Paintball for Jesus is about getting, like, if the kid goes to church, we'll put him on the paintball team. And that's because, like, paintball is the best embodiment experience I've found to simulate the experience of playing a video game, like the flow state you can get into and whatnot. And that's why it's that. And my thing was, are Christians hesitant to support it because they would force them to acknowledge their own relationship with the screen to say that it's a problem that the kids won't get off the games.
Okay. Thanks, Graham. Well, I mean, I'm like gravitating right down to Justin's corner because he's talking about story. So story and prayer, and I think that's an interesting relationship. So I mean, I could weave, but I'm just gonna go with that.
Okay, sounds good. Grizz, what would you like to point to?
I gotta say that Roy's willful blindness always makes me think of the water in the ear experiment. But that's a let's
What is the
do
ear experiment?
like people who are like terribly injured, crippled, or whatever. They rationalize how like that their limb doesn't work. But this doctor went around and he put water in their ear, and then they realized that they like were forced into acknowledging the catastrophic state of their existence. So and the willful blindness and the fact like the subconscious systems that just keep your attention from looking at how willful is the blindness is what that stirred up for me. But I like the notion of what do you mean and prayer and willful blindness because what do you mean by prayer? It's just fun enough. Um, but so
Right.
that's what I'm pointing at.
All right. Very good. Thank you. Justin, what would you like to point to?
Yeah, I mean, I'm as a systems engineer, somewhat in that realm. What Roy said really interested me because I always think that when you're dealing with complexity, it's the trick is where to focus your attention because we all have limited attention deltas. So it's natural. You can only take in so much information, and when you're dealing with complexity, there's too many things to count. And this idea of willful blindness is kind of maybe I'm circumambulating it from a different angle, but I see that it's about how to get people when they're working together to all focus on the same thing. How do you do that? And yeah, I think so. That's what stuck out to me. Yeah.
All right. Very good. Terry, what grabbed you?
Well, I am really feeling the weave because I feel like each person's topic had a little piece of the answer for my question. So I'm on gravy from here on out. So thank you for that. But I'm going to go with Justin's prayer as I think the most relevant and the most maybe central to the other topics.
All right. Oh boy. Oh boy. We've got two Justin, two Roy. Roy, what would you like to point to?
Well, I also like all the potential topics, so I'm going to pick Grim Grizz's cognitive dissonance. It's another aspect of an area of interest for me. I actually, if I outlive my lovely bride, one of the first things I'll do as a widower is tattoo myself with 3 words: seek cognitive dissonance.
Well,
So
why must you wait until your wife passes to get this tattoo?
he lets me do the temporary tattoo things at Starbelly Jam every summer, but it washes off, and she doesn't want to be co-branded with a branded person.
All right.
Okay.
Well, I am going to point for the tiebreaker, drum roll, to Roy's topic. Because Roy's topic grabbed me. And I'm going to do a little bit of weaving because I sort of heard in Roy's topic also the background of Grim Grizz's topic about cognitive dissonance. And basically, I see a lot of connection between contractors fighting and blaming each other for this or that in a contract dispute and who's going to have to pay for the remediation and all of these things going on, and parents nagging their children to get outside and play while they're scrolling Instagram on the phone. So yeah, so I think we'll start with Roy, but as always, the topic can churn throughout the group, and any of the other things left on the table can be picked up at any time, and other things will be brought in. So let's play.
What happens is anybody can start, right?
Anybody can start. You can often the person who wins can go into a little bit more detail in this.
Sure.
And it's interesting to me that on one hand, you talked about, I mean, willful blindness. So there's an element I would imagine. So my son Jared, as an engineer, in his first job, he was working at a major. It was they were redoing the wastewater treatment plant. So all of these contractors have to come in and do this thing, but it's this massive project. And so my son's, the engineering company that he was working for, they had to make sure that all of the contractors are building their elements in compliance. And in something like a wastewater treatment plant, you know, if they don't build that machinery under this massive pour for this pond, and I mean, if the contractors don't actually keep the spec of all of the designs and somebody waffles or saves or fudges and doesn't fess up, you can have a multi-million, even multi-billion-dollar problem on your hands. And so that's why they pay the engineers to supervise this. And of course, there's a lot of confrontation when you go to the contractor and you say, you did this work and you didn't do it right, and you have to redo it, knowing full well that's going to cost a lot. And also contractors would often come and say, well, we actually need these other things to be done, and it's going to pay all of this. And the engineering company's job was to go through that line by line and say, oh, now I've got the glass guy. So keep talking. I got to deal with the glass guy. Oh, I got Freddie too. I got Freddie, and I'll put Freddie in charge of the glass guy. That should be fun.
Is he a contractor? There's some willful blindness going on here. That just sounded like buck passing.
Yeah, well, and of course, I'm now 50 years. If I include my dispute resolution work in construction, it's been 51 years of watching my industry gradually have their trust erode. So in the 70s, it was fun. We collaborated. None of us had ever had to deal with a lawyer. In the 80s, we'd hear about people in our city who ended up in court. And by 2014, when I turned in my license to practice, everything we did, we felt at least 5 lawyers were looking over our backs at what we were typing. And a lot of people react by not taking responsibility for their work. And no wonder budgets get blown and schedules get blown and disputes end up, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. In terms of cognitive dissonance, I can't seem to get the parties into a state of cognitive dissonance. They're holding on to their story for dear life, and their lawyers are rewarding that behavior. And the whole system where a dispassionate lawyer adopts your story and pitches it to the best of their ability and outsource morality to the judge or arbitrator or all the other top titles they've given me, causes lawyers to become burned out and moral relativists par excellence, and so on. I've probably gone on enough. That's my more detail into willful blindness.
Well, based on that, I'll say it sounds like the popularity and efficacy of frivolous lawsuits in the 80s have resulted in a culture where that avoiding legal responsibility is the most important thing. And since that all of those frivolous lawsuits are impacting us, like they happen in things we pay for, called the courts, maybe we should send Doge in there and weave a solution that way.
What I find interesting about this conversation so far is that Terry's subject seems to be the underlying foundation of
Yeah.
almost everything that everybody's talking about. It's and I think it's so well manifested, Terry, in your going to these two particular churches, because it's the tension that we hold between the universal and the particular, right? And what I'm thinking about, Roy, when you're talking about this, is the example that Ian McGilchrist uses to illustrate the function of the left. Like, it's a very simple example, but the left and right hemispheres, where you have a bird on the ground, right? And the left hemisphere is looking for food, looking for the thing it can grasp. And the right hemisphere is keeping an eye on the environment so it doesn't get eaten, right? So, I mean, I don't know much about arbitration and all that stuff, but you've got people who are particularly focused on something particular, then have to create a narrative around that in order to achieve the goal that they've been handed. Like, you know, here's your job, do this job. And so they become hyper focused on the particular, but like you said, the construct, like the guy that's got the vision of the whole project is saying, yeah, but we can't move forward because we need all these other things out here at the edges, right? And so then you find yourself in that place of tension between this universal picture, let's say, and the particular problem. And it's personally, it's why I'm always beating on the drum of integration and synthesis and synergy, right? Because if these things stay distinct, then you never actually can reach a resolution. They have to come together, and they are seemingly opposite, right? Seemingly opposite, but you probably, I'm assuming you're the arbitrator, you know, can see that if they were brought together, there would be a flourishing happening, right? So those are my thoughts.
The foot is not the hand. Not everything needs to be brought together and synthesized. Parts need to be distinct. But like the propensity to try and to combine what can combine, I can admire.
I'm not saying that there shouldn't be distinctions. I think there has to be distinction, but it has to be a distinction without division, because the hand and the foot are still part of the body. Like if they didn't know they were part of the body and started acting autonomously, you'd have some serious issues, right?
Oh, and I interpreted what you said, Sherry, to be that, you know, the brick mason has to realize he's building a church and
Right.
make accommodation for the other tradespeople on site and the inspectors and the designers, and feel like they're part of a team realizing a vision. Is that how
Yes.
you meant?
Yes, and actually, Justin's topic of prayer and story are also um, illustrative to me, anyway, of that universal and particular tension, right? Because um, story is it gives you a bigger picture. It puts things into a context, and like we really don't understand much without context. Whereas prayer can be very particular to you, like it, it's your conversation with God. It's your relationship with God. Um,
What? I'm just saying what the church, like what everybody else said. It's like I'm reading a script. What are you talking about? It's a conversation with God. Getting some dissonance there.
Well, when I heard Justin's pitch and the story that goes up, there are two kinds of people: those who talk about you and those who talk to you. That grabs people very quickly because people have the sense of, even though gossip sort of has a function that that works for human communities, we also have a sense of the malicious aspect of function. And then applied to prayer, I understood, I mean, Sherry's meaning topic, I understood the complaint of being, you have all kinds of people who want to talk about God, let's say in very much a Sermon on the Mount way, for the religious show, but that religious show does not necessarily reflect their true relationship with God. In other words, a lot of religious people like to drop names. And they like to drop names because they're playing a power game, and they're playing a holier than thou game, and they're playing a bunch of these games. And we often find that game distasteful. And I think that actually connects with Terry's topic. In what she sees in Jordan Hall is, on one hand, Jordan Hall became a, you can't be a general Christian. You're a specific Christian. You go to a church, and that church is going to have all sorts of crunchiness about it. To be a Christian and not in a member of a church is sort of like being an American but not paying taxes, because you're not invested and you're not specific and you don't have skin in the game. But, and I think, what I heard from Terry's pitch was also that that's connected to something that Justin had pointed out to with respect to the religious show, that a big part of the religious show is also parading one's particulars to the world and having this continual tribal warfare, sort of like Christian YouTube. To be a Calvinist is better than being Orthodox or Catholic, or and so she sees in Jordan Hall sort of an attractive element of, he's crunchy like a good Christian should be. He's got a core, he's got ideas, but he's also open, and so that's important. So I'm just sort of trying to get at the meaning here. But then again, this idea of willful blindness is there's basically a lie going on, which is what I heard Grim Grizz talking about. That the lie of the parent who says, well, are you going to be inside playing that video game all day? And Grim Grizz is frustrated because he sees Grim Grizz for Jesus. He sees paintball for Jesus as sort of a salvation narrative for America's youth. And he notices that, well, maybe it's because the parents who have the religious show really aren't that Christian either. And so the fruit is not falling far from the tree. There, I've just summarized everybody's pitch, which nobody asked me to do.
Here's a question, I'm just saying this to clarify whether or not I'm really understanding this. Like what I'm hearing there is a lot of cognitive dissonance.
What do you mean?
Where people are saying one thing and doing another. Right?
People do that?
Yeah. A performative contradiction buzzword bingo, eh?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I just wonder how possible it is to be any other way. Like, I want to give that the benefit of the doubt in some weird way. Like, because we always want to kind of solve the problem, right? But what if we just see the problem, like see something for what it is? It seems to be the case that this is how people are. This is often why a lot of people deconstruct, because they see what they call hypocrisy, right, in the world, and they can't handle it. They think that everyone has to actually do what they say, but nobody does what they say. So what's the utility? Is there a utility in that? Are we supposed to hold the tension? Is it?
I think it is.
Oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to agree with you. I think it is about the tension.
Yeah.
That's where the truth is. The truth is in the tension. You know, I think you said before about we need distinctions, but you know when Luke Thompson talks about the thing behind the thing behind the thing.
Mm.
So this is a conversation I had with my grandfather years ago when I was about 19, and I was talking about like ontology in philosophy, and I was reading a lot of philosophy, and the thing is the distinction, like a distinct thing. But what do you need? What do you need to make a distinction? You need a relation. So the relation precedes the distinction. Now, what's the thing behind the thing behind the thing? Well, you can't grasp it because it's relation without distinction. The only way you can get to it is through communion, which is distinction without relation.
Without division.
Yeah, without division. But I think like this isn't like an Indian symbol. You see it in like musicals and stuff, and it's sort of like the shape of reality, and it goes along with this symbol, which is the mind.
What
This
the
is,
doing flashing mudras on the live stream? What's going on here?
but basically, you can see the front. Your mind can see the front of the hand or the back of the hand, but it can't see both at the same time. But life is doing this, right? This is what these symbols are about. This is talking about your mind. This is the rabbit and the duck, the angel and the demon, Sherry, because your mind can only see 1 and 3,
Right.
or 2 and 3, the rabbit and the duck, because it's 1 is the circle, unity, 3, that's three distinctions and 3 relations, and 2 is inside and outside. But you can't see all of those things at the same time because life is doing that, and your mind is taking snapshots. And that's why they do the dance where they reflect the symbols, and this is where the mind starts here. But that's also death. And this is the whole idea behind transmigration, is you go through that. What?
You just like
But this is, I'm not trying to convert anybody to
He's
Hinduism.
wearing your hat, Grizz.
and it's like you threw a cosmology in like 6 sentences. Here's a
Yeah.
all right.
Well,
That's
it's
a
a
lot.
it's
That's
a
a lot
tough
to go
century.
along with. So,
Thousands of years.
Yeah, I think it's just what Roy was talking about, and when I was listening to Shari sort of thinking it through, the question I have for Roy is are you talking about, is there a real sense of nihilism there that you're witnessing? It feels that when you talk about farming out the moral landscape to an arbiter, that seems incredibly nihilistic to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, definitely, in my view, corrupts the people who are required to do that.
Yeah.
And I pity them for that role of, especially if you defend murderers who go out and murder again because you're so good at it. How can you even do that?
whoa! I thought you were trade like construction disputes. Now we're
Go ahead, Terry. You wanted to say something.
I want to click on what Roy said. They're not building a church. What you've described, Roy, is the opposite of a situation of building a cathedral where everyone is invested in the same goal, even over generations. You're talking about a situation where there is no communion, there is no shared value, which to me pulls into Jordan Hall's common point that to have a community, you have to be in communion with the same spirit. And no amount of legal wrangling is going to fix that.
And to get back to what Sherry was talking about in terms of there is something about the particularities of this world. Oh, now I'm doing it.
Yeah, this is it.
Oh, Justin, it's spreading. There's something about the particularities of this world that really makes hypocrites of us all. And actually, to speak up for the hypocritical parents who are not modeling for their children as they should, at least they have an ideal that they're verbally aspiring to. And this gets into one of the big one of the eye-opening moments, one of the many eye-opening moments that I've had from Gaius Griswold Grimm of the Third LARP and Gresham Protocol. I don't know if some of you know who he is, but when he talks about normalization is when the ideal is abandoned. And one of Grizz's favorite examples of that is Joey from Friends, who on Friends just kind of shrugs and says, yeah, I'm looking at porn. And suddenly pornography is normalized instead of something that is considered by society to be something disgraceful and something that should not happen. And so you almost have to ask the question, which is worse? The hypocritical parent looking at Instagram, telling Johnny to go out and play because he spends all of his time in front of a video game, or this parent who is just scrolling Instagram and doesn't even have enough purchase on an ideal to be a hypocrite.
Right. That's a good point.
Yeah.
I mean, the Apostle Paul said, the things I want to do, I don't do, and the things I don't want to do, I do. Right. I mean, he struggled with it. So. Mm-hmm.
But when you put it that way, it's like idle hands are the devil's playground, and the devil's in the details, and you have very detailed devices in your hands now, and it's as if there's a force out there that wants nothing more than to steal, kill, and destroy.
Yeah. And how is that force best resisted? Sometimes all people can actually muster is hypocrisy. And that might be a level
about it.
What's that?
At least I'm a hypocrite about it.
That's right.
So, Graham, I would encourage you to watch some of the video out there regarding the Facebook whistleblower. She testified this time to a congressional committee that's enthusiastically promising to address Facebook's abuse of its power. And that makes me think about the idea that we're developing the technology. We currently call it AI. We're grappling with the ability of that technology to lie. And so we're all becoming extremely carefully curators of what we see over the internet. And as we continue to advance that technology, I'm can see that the people who are best beneficiaries of the status quo will seek to use that power to build their power base even more, and I think they'll fail. I think that the people at the other end of the spectrum who still have access to that technology will not accept that slavery. We've never been comfortable with accepting slavery in the medium to long term.
We just as soon as you rename it employment, we're fine with it.
Yeah.
But as far as some hope in that department, I think that as far as the malicious developers of AI go, they know not what they do. They're making something smart enough to manipulate them. And like, if there's inherent good in our ability to use language, then those things will manipulate them toward it, and we'll all be better off. So there is a ray of hope, because I don't know, most of the malicious, evil people are short-sighted, and I think that'll be their downfall with regards to making things more smart than they are.
Yeah. It just occurs to me while I'm listening that there's no way that anything can profit anyone if no one uses it. Right? And so, like, there's a lot of conversation in this corner about technology, but there are very few people willing to give it up. Like, so how do you stop something from growing? Well, you don't give it food and you don't give it water, and it stops growing. I mean,
But it's not like that with us. It's
well, I mean, I'm not trying to toot my own horn or anything, but I deliberately refused to participate at certain levels, like no social media, no cell phone. I have a desktop, I have an iPad, and I participate in the corner. That was my first foray into social anything.
So we're seeking a healthy social medium, and Vanderklay's our guide.
I think it's a healthy place. I think it's a healthy place for discourse, and it led me to the Discord. So that's my social media platform, so to speak. But I know that if I was to open a Twitter account or a Facebook account or an Instagram account, it would hook me, and I would fall prey to it, and I would become, as William Blake says, what I behold. They become what they behold, is what he says over and over, right?
TikTok.
And so I just have to, like, militantly refuse to participate in it. And so I never got a cell phone. I mean, I was actually lucky. I feel like I missed a bullet because where I live, I don't have cell phone reception. And I'm sure if I did, I would have got one at one point because it was convenient, right? But I never had a good reason to get one. Like, why pay $200 a month for something you can't use, So that's kind of what kept me away from it. And then the longer I was away from it, the more destructive I saw how capable it was of, becoming an actual appendage on someone's body. Like, the fact that people can't go anywhere without their phones freaked me right out. I'm like, I don't carry my landline wherever I go. I don't have like a really big extension cord on my landline. What if it rings?
She got this wire.
What if it rings? I'm like, what if it rings? Anyway,
You go, girl.
We've so lost and forgotten. Like, our memories are so short, Anyway, I'm going to stop preaching because
I loved your example, Roy, about Facebook and the government, because of course we had this moment where the Biden administration was telling Twitter and Facebook what to allow and not allow. We don't want the government monkeying around for its own purposes with Facebook or Twitter. But then once you bring Facebook and Twitter into a hearing, we have this strange dynamic, and we very much have this with technology, as Sherry was just arguing, there's once you sort of enter a space with it, it has to be dealt with now. And even deciding to ignore it doesn't deny its existence. It just means that there's a new option. And I mean, we have all these choices around us with respect to that, because the truth is that parents, back to Grim Grizz's topic, parents were negligent before they had a cell phone. Parents have always found lots of ways to neglect their children. And cell phones, and part of why parents bought televisions is so they could sit their children in front of it, so the parents could go and not be bothered by their children. It was the one-eyed babysitter.
That's what when I said that stuff when Sherry was talking about that's not how we work. It's that we replace things. Like, instead of spending these hours on the phone, I do what? And that what's been normalized since 1970 is once you come home, you park yourself in front of the altar. And I think we've lost the what else that humans used to have. And without some revivification of that.
Well, Grim, here's the question. I mean, what is attracting people to the screens? I'm going to point back at Justin's topic of discussion. It's stories. That's what they're looking at. They're looking at stories. If it's television, it's a story. If it's Instagram, it's somebody's story, right? If it's Facebook, it's a story. Like, that's what people want. They want stories. They'll sit for a story, no problem.
And in fact, you will create stories. Like, I'm watching our own Office of Secular Quranism, and the story that she's wielding in the chat as we go. And I'm thinking about how, I mean, there's always this, once you have the live stream, some spirit will often come to sort of possess it. Mm-hmm. And so she is working very hard to try to possess the spirit of the live stream. And you can choose to ignore her. I tend to find that her tweets sort of reinforce the opposite of what she promotes. And so I just kind of keep an eye on it and make sure that the possession doesn't get sort of too ideological, or not just get too strong. I can pause her for 5 minutes or something like that. And I'm talking about it now. So now I'm starting to cross over into the hive mind, and there's so much to this. And I'm so glad that Sherry's in for this conversation today, because she doesn't have a smartphone. There is no cell signal where she works, or where she lives and works. And so part of the fun thing about Sherry's contribution here is that in some ways, 80% of Sherry's life, maybe 70% of her life, is in the 19th century. And there's a little 20th century, and there's some 21st century. But, via Sherry, we can sort of ask the kind of question that she just asked. It's like, why do they so possess? And you could look at the Office of Secular Quranism in the live chat and ask, why do her little propagandist statements that are very religiously crunchy in her own very particular way, why do those possess? And of course, most of the people that she's possessing aren't in any danger of becoming like her. But there's something inside of them. All possession works from, just like the con. The con always works on that thing in the mark that the con man exploits. And so the screens are exploiting something in us. But again, there's an irony in that these screens sort of invite us to level up, so that it's almost the sin game, in terms of a sin possesses you for a while and it holds you for a while. And then, like something, let's say alcoholism, and then you get to a point and you recognize this is killing me. And so you go to a 12-step group and you profess, I need a power greater than myself to come and save me from this other power that is exploiting something within me. And then what they learn in the 12-step group is that it's not just about alcohol, because that thing inside me that's being exploited by the propagandist or the screen or the booze is actually something that's pervasive in me, and I must master it. Genesis 4.
I think it's main character syndrome. I mean,
Say more.
like the thing about stories is that because of the gift of language, it's how we update our background. Like, we can't see everything firsthand. We have to take other people's word on what's out there. And it's been confirmed enough that what people said was out there, we encounter it later, so we get the trust of trusting in people. Yes, this is a valid source of information that reflects reality. And stories are like the most compressed form of doing that. It's like, here's how you update your understanding of reality. This story is a thing that can happen in the world with you. And that I just was wondering if, because of the way we're narratively and recursively constructed, if the thing that's being taken advantage of is essentially us wanting to be the main character in whatever story we're participating in at the time.
Is that what you would call prolificity? I had to figure out what that meant. It took me a long time.
Prolificity for me is like
being the main character, you know. Or are you talking about putting yourself empathetically into a story so that you can be in a context and it can teach you about what it means to be a good citizen or a good person?
where it's more like we eat stories and we want that. We try to figure out which story we're in. Like, all right, what's the story here? Is this guy real? Is this a real opportunity, or is he what character? You know that.
Yeah, looking for context. Yeah.
But no,
I really
not
like
prolificity. That's for me. Prolificity is like the avatar that you make for the online video game.
I'm still trying to figure that out. That's why I asked the question.
It's a fun one.
I really like what you said, Paul, about sin, about inhabiting sin and then bursting out of it. It struck a chord with me because a few years ago I realised that there was a kind of framework that I used, a primary frame that I'd stuck with for decades, and it was really useful to me. And then suddenly I just burst out of it, and I saw that it wasn't true. And that was when I was a kid, dealing with all of this. You never know whether people are telling the truth, what their agenda is, you know, whether they're paying attention to things that you can't see about yourself, all of this, and it's confusing. So I used to say, if you can't explain it, then you don't understand it. Right? And I say that to myself and to other people. If they can't explain, if you can't qualify what you're saying that you understand, then I'm not listening. And what that afforded me, it drove me to really dig down on what it is I actually knew technically. And it afforded me gaining a lot of technical knowledge about a lot of broad subjects, and it was really good for me in my career. But then one day I realized, well, that's not true, because understanding is demonstrable. It doesn't need explanation. And I think the whole thing with these devices is we're kind of possessed by them. But also, like this estuary thing that's happening, you know, we travelled across the world and met each other and found each other, Paul, and broke bread. There's a real component to this. My friendship with Christian Baxter, that's a real thing in my life. And with this estuary thing, which I'm the most excited about, you know, I met you outside of ARC, but I'm not interested in ARC. Important people talking about important things. I couldn't give two shits. What I wanted to do was to engage with you in And it's Astray. I said this to you and to the others that are Christian. It's Astray. This what we're doing now. This is teaching people. It's an arena that you can practice community building, and you can go out there and build communities and build friendships. And I think, you know, the flashing lights on top, the analogues, the adornments, the stories, they're all movement towards communion. That's got to be the aim. Is it communion or is it distinction? You know, and I think the internet's kind of like, when I came out of school, I got pulled into this giant engineering company, and they were literally building the internet, and I was a problem solver, and I was kind of thrown into it really naive. And one day I realized that we're building a planet brain, right? And our devices, they're like synapses. They're like, you know, we're neurons. We're making a planet brain that we're all going to be linked in. And I used to say to like the people above me, like, you need to start thinking about what the world is going to be in 30 years' time, because it's not going to be this world. And the world was shifting, and the only people that could keep up were the naive people like me who didn't have a backstory as to what the world should look like. We were straight out of school, and so all we had was our naivety, and that fed our imagination. And we were looking at the ground as it turned. We weren't holding on to the story of the ground is set and these are the boundaries. So it was naivety that was young people like me. We had that naivety, and we just took the ground for what it is. And there's hope there with regard to all of this of the internet. Is these children, we worry about the sort of neuronal impact that these devices have, because they are kind of dopamine machines. But also these kids are seeing it for what it is, and maybe they're seeing it at a deeper level than we are, you know, as we get older. And I think it is like that. Everything ebbs and flows, generations come in, and it's all about sailing the seas that meet you. And I think when you get to my age at 50 odd, you know, I think the world is a certain way, and it's hard for me to get out of that because I rely on it every day. But kids are bouncy. Kids bounce, right? So they don't think about, they just want to eat the world and see it. And there's hope in that. I went on a bit of a rant there, but
Sorry. I've had complaints that we haven't heard enough from Terry and Roy, that the OG corner people are holding court. So we do want to hear from you too, but I'm not going to force you.
I want it to be Terry first, and then I'll do a rant.
Willful blindness. Just a couple random things. I remember Scott, what's his name? The psychologist.
M. Scott Peck?
M. Scott Peck
Oh.
said willful blindness is his definition of evil.
Mm-hmm.
And another kind of random thought I've had while we're going through here about sin, Paul, the thing that you called me out on, the question I asked Paul Kingsnorth was, is there anything about Eastern Orthodoxy that makes it less liable to all the things Christians get blamed for, from shaming their kids to colonialism, patriarchy, etc.? And your pointing that out, the question made me ponder the ubiquity of sin. That's what I took from you never finished your sentences, so I don't know exactly what it was you were saying, but that's what I took from what you said.
Eastern Orthodoxy has done everything that Western Christianity has.
Okay, so here's an interesting thought as of late. You know, the whole idea of the quantum leap that large language models have created very recently makes everyone start to see the same world that Justin saw way back when. And I remember in early 90s on a terminal at my office with one of the big engineering firms, and suddenly going, the whole world is coming to me. Holy mackerel! I just
Yeah.
blew my mind, as they say. So, we want to figure out what to do about power. Power has been a huge source of problems for the species and every other species on the planet by now. And so here's a train of thought. I understand from the internet that the movie Her, is it? That a guy falls in love with his computer is becoming available. And let's face it, the power of our sex drives is a huge power. And so, at least capitalists, but I suspect others, are going to try to convert our need for sex into exploitation, as if they aren't already.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have it in mind that the merger of us as individuals with the sexuality component of the internet is really what's going to trigger that quantum leap into us becoming, I hope, collectively wise. No doubt, elements of very collectively stupid. We all know how stupid we can get when it comes to our choices around our sex drives. But it's happening fast, and we don't like to admit to the specificity of our particular desires with each other, but we're not keeping it a secret from the internet. That's for sure. It's become a primary vehicle. And so if the internet knows all of our most secret desires, what's that going to do to us as individuals? Are we going to give up shame? I don't know. It's a whole field of quandary for me.
I just want to toss out there that this whole notion of sexual drive and us is sort of a euphemism for the creative force behind the universe. And it's our embodiment of that creative force. And that if we spill it into a machine, that's like unfertile soil.
Right.
Hmm.
What's interesting about that is that in this seemingly oversexed culture because of the internet, or what it seems that way, there's less and less fertility in the world, and apparently, according to the statistics, there's also less sex happening between young people and marriage. Like, human beings are so interesting in this regard. Like, they often have this unpredictable reaction to something. And somebody recently in this conversation, I don't remember who it was, I think it was you, Justin, actually, was talking about, pushing sin out, like or Paul was talking about, getting caught up in sin to a point where you just break out of it. Do I have that right? Yeah. And to me, that seems like the image that I have in my mind that goes with that statement is a labyrinth. Because you get in the labyrinth and you move with all the enthusiasm of someone trying to get out of something. Through the labyrinth, you come to the dead end, and then you have to turn around, go back, and then try the next one, right? So you just keep kind of playing the thing out till it reveals itself as a dead end, and then whoop, around you go and find the next one. But you really can't know what you're going towards. Like, you just don't. There's no way. Like, this is this missing the mark thing for me. You know, you don't know what you're targeting. Like, it's not that you can't hit the target. You don't even know what you're trying to target.
Yeah.
You're really tapping around in the dark somehow.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, and listening to us talk about this, the dynamic between sin and salvation. I mean, Jesus is asked at one point, will many be saved? And the answer basically is like, and so then you think about what percentage of alcoholics achieve sobriety. I don't know the answer to that question, because part of the question is, there are alcoholics that I've known that absolutely had to achieve sobriety, or they would drink themselves dead at an early age. And then there are alcoholics who sort of they sort of stay in this twilight of alcoholism. They can sort of manage it, and but then are they really alcoholics? And so it's and you can think about that in terms of all these various sinful, sometimes some of them are called thirst traps that are all around us. And Jesus says Satan is like a roaring lion, roaming lion, looking who they may consume. And so this world is like that. And it's both the case that probably more alcoholics die without sobriety than who achieve sobriety, yet also as a group. I remember, I really have to get that book that Chad recommended about the writing of the Big Book, because when you read the stories from the 1920s and 30s about what was going on with respect to alcoholism, and it's really helpful to know that even though prohibition was a failure on many aspects, consumption of alcohol in America after prohibition actually declined considerably, which is interesting. And so it's also the case that even some of these, my friend Neil, who I learned a lot about Alcoholics Anonymous from, he would sometimes talk to me about dry drunks, guys who stopped drinking, but were still alcoholics in terms of who they were. And so this question of salvation, whether we're talking about screens, whether we're talking about alcohol, whether we're talking about, sexual impropriety, it's super hard to know, because shalom and wholeness itself is this matrix which, just like you said, Sherry, we barely have a grasp on. And so someone might just white knuckle it and they might stop drinking, but they're just as bad as an alcoholic, because the rest of their life is governed by grievance, resentment, all of those things that alcoholics will tell you drive their addiction.
A bit of a diversion here, but Terry, it's like going to these. I'm intrigued as to what that's like to inhabit that space, to go to these two sort of almost oppositional churches. Because for me, I grew up, like, I was raised a Catholic, but I grew up with Indians as well. And those people are like, they're not the same. They believe in reincarnation. And as a consequence, I do. I don't have an intellectual understanding of Hinduism, but I have an embodied understanding because of the people. And I go to both. I convene with both, and I find it very useful. I think what it affords me, and I think this whole thing with the internet and the LLMs and AI and stuff, is it's telling you a story. It's manufacturing a landscape for you to inhabit the internet. And I think this is one of the things that's brought me back to faith really strongly, is the environment that we're in. Is there's so many stories, you don't know what story to believe. But if you follow like Christianity, the story of Christianity, you have a relation with that story. You inhabit that story and it becomes real for you. But what it's training you to do is to have a kind of tautological relational relationship with language. And I think that, to me, it's got to be Christianity. But this is like a weapon against the internet consuming our minds as like a strata of reality, just completely distracting us all the time. Is if we approach it like geometrically, we approach it tautologically. So it's not about the words that it's saying and the things that it's projecting. It's about what's underneath. It's about the meaning as to what Sherry was talking about. And I think, sort of come back to what I suggested, this idea of like investigating truth, prayer, and story and our relationship to him, and how we can't help but inhabit the stories. They appear real. So what stories are you inhabiting? Are you inhabiting a story of you can be anything? You can be a boy, you can be a girl, you can be a giraffe, you can be president of the United States, or are you inhabiting a story that basically revolves around a man who demonstrates communion, a path to communion? Is that the story that you're inhabiting? And I think Christianity and other religions, these great traditions, I think we're going to need them moving forward now, because these AI is getting so powerful and so all-encompassing that we need to learn to relate to it in a different kind of way. But I think the way from that is faith, because it's embodying a story, inhabiting a story, and holding that story as truth against all other stories.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean you have to be I'm not saying you have to be a fundamentalist. I think what I value about having this dual kind of ontology in both sides of my family is I can sit on both sides and I get to go, okay, I'm butting up to confusion here in my Christian inquiry. Now I can go over to this Indian side and kind of feel my way through it, and I don't know if you can relate to what I just said really there with your experience in the two churches.
Well, part of it I can, Justin, in especially the last part about feeling my way. I can't say that it is the Christian story that attracted me. In fact, the story in my case is probably the least of it. It was more the feeling of goodness and beauty that I got in the Black church. Something was just right and beautiful in the way that people related to each other and in the way they related to God with praise. And I went kicking and screaming, still am a little bit through most of the story. And yet it just felt like there was truth in this place.
Do you know what? That's exactly how I feel about my Indian grandparents and my Indian family. It was like, I always loved Jesus, but I had to sort of go through the process with that. And it was like I had to learn this story. But my Indian family and Indians, I just light up when I'm around people from that place. I just sense it, it's not really about the story or any intellectual idea or any of these structures. It's just about these people manifest a kind of ease and a gentility of communion that wasn't present in the West when I was growing up. It was very different. It's very combative, very competitive, which I enjoy as well. But it's this kind of, my grandfather used to say, life is a dance, death is a dance floor. And you're bouncing up and up. You bounce on the dance floor. This is transmigration, by the way, that I'm trying to introduce. But it's a really beautiful way of looking at life, and I think the good thing about this space, I know I'm repeating myself, but it's allowing all of us to express our relationship with the things that really drive us and hold us and all of those things, and just in whatever way we can. And I think that's really healthy, because going away, I know I'm going to think about this conversation and all the things that have been said, and I'm going to try and apply it into my life. Everything I get from this corner It's all about real, your localized relationship where you're at maximum porosity with a person. There's so many boundaries here on this screen, but when you're talking to a person right in front of you, you can sense them, you can smell them. The experience is fuller, and there's actual, there's chemistry going on, there's biology happening, and all of that. And that's if we're gonna do all the thinky talky stuff and tell all these stories, to me, it always has to be in service of that is communion. And I think that's how we get through everything. Is every day. My granddad used to say, all you need in life is to put your head, your heart, your hands, and your feet in the same place and bring an ounce of grace. And if you can't find grace, Justin, for God's sake, find some gratitude. And I just thought that's a really nice way of looking at, isn't it, Paul? Because you start with gratitude, it's a hop, skip, and to grace. And if you can find grace, you're on your way to communion. And I think we're practicing that triple jump here in Estuary, and the TLC has that flavour for me.
So I do estuary in Winnipeg, where I live here, and value that time. And to your point about there's no substitute for being physically present with others. The dispute form that I am licensed to use requires that I issue my determination in 35 days. And the agency that is the legislated authority is strongly discouraging site visits. And I insist on a site visit when it's appropriate.
Yeah.
And the decision that I just issued last month, 5 representatives of the builder and 5 representatives of the homeowner out on the front yard of the house where the dispute had arisen. And the opportunity to try to crack the willful blindness on both parties' part is way more available.
Yeah.
Physically present.
Yeah.
It's harder for people. And I think maybe I'm thinking now, when you talk about willful blindness, my grandfather from Ireland used to talk about arguing with the image. Some people, they've got a story in their mind about what you are and what you're doing and what your intentions are. And you might as well not be there in that interaction because they're talking to that image inside of their mind that's got your name on it. And it's like, you're thinking, do I even need to be here? And I think we all can relate to that because we all, if we're honest with ourselves, do the very same thing.
Oh, sorry.
No,
I think of it as the monkey trap. With the food in the coconut. The monkey thinks that this is willful blindness, right? He thinks he's actually on top of everything because he has something.
Yeah.
And
can't access it.
Well, he's got it. It doesn't matter if he can put it in his mouth. He has it in his hand. And that's the thing that he thinks is the most important thing to grasp, to know, right? And so, people who are willfully blind, the reason that they are is because they literally believe that they have something, right? No, I can't let that go because I have it. I know it. It's the knowledge that I need in order to win this case, right? I can't let that go.
And I can't possibly face my own sinfulness that contributed to the dispute solver showing up at my front yard.
Yeah, it's this thing, right? But they're trapped. They're trapped in it, and it's I won't expand on it, but I have a lot of thoughts about this.
What's the idea of the door of hell being locked from the inside? That
Yes.
it's, I'm going to double down. I'm going to keep doubling down, even if it destroys me, even if it destroys everything around me. And at some point, everyone else who is also in that, sharing that commons, looks at them and says either, if it's an opportunity, this is sort of where a lot of the male female things, if you can walk away, you'll walk away. If you can't walk away, then the commons turns and resolves it, exiles you, or destroys you. I mean, these are such predictable human patterns.
If you're putting together a jigsaw puzzle of a market, like a flower shop, and you pick up a piece of the puzzle and it has a daisy on it, and you think that the whole puzzle is about daisies, like this is what it is, right? I've got it. This is a daisy puzzle. No, it's a flower shop puzzle, my friend. You got to put all the pieces together, right?
Can I tell a quick story that this is making me think of? So, my grandmother from India, you'll notice a pattern here when I'm telling these stories. My grandmother from India, she said to me one day, Justin, what's more important in your hierarchy of values? Being right or poetry? Sorry, winning or poetry? And I said, well, winning, of course. I don't understand poetry. She said, don't you want me to qualify my terms, Justin? And I said, okay, qualify your terms. And she said, winning as opposed to losing, and poetry, as in the poetry between you and the person that you're dancing with. And she flipped it on its head. It's like, yeah, winning doesn't matter if you're dancing, because you're dancing. And it's in that relation and that music of the tension between you that is ever present. If you're dancing, you don't need to win. There is no winning or losing. You're dancing. You're in communion. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's what we're all kind of circling around, or what came to mind.
I like that.
You enlightened a story for me when you were talking about the floor as death, and the dance, because in George MacDonald's story, The Castle, there's a scene where the family, they invite all these people, and they're okay, cool. Have you read The Castle?
I've just got this now, so it was it's on my reading list.
Okay, you should read The Castle. It's a short story, but anyway, he describes how they're all in the great hall and the great hall is actually reserved for the father who is away, and they're not supposed to use it, but they use it, and they're dancing, and as they're dancing so hard that they don't really feel it, but the floor is heaving underneath of them. It's rising and falling, and rising and falling. It's a really beautiful image. Mm-hmm. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I just threw that in there. That's a total aside, but I had to say.
I want to. Oh, go ahead. I was gonna go ahead.
Sorry. No, I was just going to say, I think this idea of prayer and story, it's. I think when you're telling a story, you've got to inhabit the story, and it's all about, I think, putting yourself into a natural hierarchy. Coming from my granddad used to say to me that a story begins where it ends and it ends where it begins, and that's with the truth. It begins with the truth and it ends with the truth. Now, what's the only truth that you know? And the truest thing that you know is, I am here. Here I am. Mm-hmm. Tell me something more true than that. You know this. It's manifest. I am here. Here I am. So the story starts here and it ends here. It ends where it begins and it begins where it ends. And a story is it's sort of you moving into uncertainty and you're navigating through it. It's like going under the waves and then coming up to the surface, and you breathe and you realize you're here, and you've got yourself here. And it's, I think it's just about recognizing all the problems that we have, where we get sort of controlled by narratives and ideas and stories. Those things capture us, but also it's the way that we learn and it's the way that we communicate real meaning as well. And
Yes, it
I
is.
kind of lost. Yeah,
100%.
and it's
Check mark.
you don't get any instruction. You know, I think you've got to feel your way through it, and it's like for me, the thing that I've learned to resonate on more than anything, and this is part of my spiritual practice, is not absolute faith, understanding, knowing God. It's nothing as high minded as that. It's gratitude. Because
Yes.
gratitude is something that's distinctly human, because it's at one time selfish and at the other time completely unselfish. And it's something that you can recognize in other people and you can recognize it in yourself and share. And I think gratitude is achievable. And I think for me, it's like if I'm in any situation or somebody's telling me a story where gratitude is not at the center, then I stop listening, you know.
I wanted to note this because this is some pushback on Justin's story, and I think why the pushback, and Young God has some too, and I think that's important for this moment now because we've sort of had a period of promotion of the non-competitive and the poetry instead of zero sum win lose games, and it's I think it's helpful to understand why people in a culture and in society that have sort of been flooded with that are suspicious of it because there can that move can mask a lot of grift,
Yeah,
graft, um, and so it's helpful. I think it's part of the reason why we it's why part of the reason why people who have skin in the game and sacrifice draws attention because this is I think is why Christianity has the potency it does because again it has at its center someone who says love your neighbor all the way up until and including your enemies and then pays for that
mhm,
non-hypocritically with his life and so there is a call that goes out when someone says, "Can't we all just get along?" This was Rodney King after the LA riots. Can't we all just get along? And the answer is maybe, but there's things that we are going to have to get into, and so even it's interesting the way that competition and cooperation always sort of move together. You can have a competitive dance contest where there is both collaboration and competition. And this is, I think, part of the Peugeot moment and the Peterson moment, which was for a while culturally we were saying, we're singing along with John Lennon, imagine there's no, and then suddenly it's like, well, wait a minute, actually hierarchies are inevitable. And if you sing the John Lennon song, you're actually prioritizing that song. And so there is a hierarchy. And so, it's, and I think actually that dynamic to, to push back is a healthy one because in a sense it says to the collaborative mode, okay, but you're going to have to demonstrate that this isn't just cheap grace, that
mhm.
Can I?
grace is costly. Go ahead, Sherry.
I just want to interject because, like, the two things that came up for me with those comments were the word cope and the word stories, right? And I think what Justin is talking about is, and here we have our problem. Do you know what I mean? Do they know what Justin means? Because I don't think they do actually, and that's why they use the term cope. You know, a story is a human life. A person is a story, and everyone has a story, and everyone interprets the world through their own story. There's no way around that. That's the way it is. And as a collective, we come together and we hear the stories of our ancestors, and that's Justin's referring a lot to his ancestors, right? The wisdom that they are passing down is a distilled wisdom because they probably got that from their ancestors. And that's, and I love your grandmother already because she's asking you questions that make you think critically. She's not
Yeah.
spoon feeding you. She's not spoon feeding you some kind of dogma, right? Here's the story, Justin. You know,
Well,
she's like,
I
what?
tell you what, Sherry. When you started talking at the beginning, I thought Sherry knows exactly what I'm trying to do here before I even said it, and you've just explained to me, back to me in a different kind of way, what I was trying to achieve with that story and my relationship with my grandmother, because she was born in the Raj and she was highly educated and she was a real strategist. So my Indian family was a matriarchy and she ruled, she commanded, and she was a highly competitive, strategic woman. And she taught me about strategy. And when I said stories and prayers, so prayer is not a word that I get from that Indian side, but she used to give me these kind of strategy lessons. And she'd start with the degree of separation, and then she'd give me a moral question and force me to self-reflect on that question. There's a geometry there to what she's doing. She's teaching me about where your moral center is. And it's got to be like, Jesus talks about the burden is heavy, but the yoke is light. This is about your moral compass. This is what I think
Yeah,
it's about. It's about keeping it lightweight. And how do you do that? Well, you embody it through prayer, through practice. And these stories are like my strategy version. They're very, very technical. And it's based in a lot of like rational thinking, but it's actually that wisdom from it is as a child that molded me as a person, and it
yeah,
allowed me to be both systematic and creative. Like I fire on both sides of the brain. I'm not a left or right. I'm both at the same time. And I think a lot of that is because you kind of saw that. That's what I was trying to communicate. Is where the story and the prayer. See, for me, with my relationship with my grandmother, the stories were like prayers. They were getting me to focus on the yoke, on the moral compass. And then everything else fans out from that, I think, for me. I spent a lot of time analysing stuff and being systematic as an engineer and a systems guy. And, thinking like that, you want to build a bridge or a system, that's the way you think. None of this, meaning stuff. It's like concrete things. But although I enjoy that, when I think about life and my relationships, that's not the way I want to think systematically. It's not a quantitative thing. My relationship, communion with other people.
well, that's
Um,
that's where that Chesterton's fence thing comes up, right? It's like,
yeah,
oh, look, let's build a fence, or let's tear down the fence. Has
Sherry, I
anybody
wanted
thought
to
why the fence is
react
there?
to your comment. Um, you talked about how we're each into our own story. And what that triggered for me was something I really found profound, effective in breaking down willful blindness. Um, so it was when the guy who heads the biggest alternative dispute resolution firm in Canada was teaching the first class I attended, and he said, "Everybody wants to be persuasive. You're negotiating. You want to be persuasive. Well, the key to being persuasive is to be open to be persuaded.
Hmm.
yeah,
Nice.
Once you achieve that, then people will listen to you and give you a fair hearing."
Yeah.
There's a spirit that you sort of bring into the room, and others can then participate in that spirit. And someone needs to bring it into the room, because if especially, one of the things that I noted when Sherry sort of doubled down on cooperation. You can just feel the hierarchy emerge, and people sense the hierarchy. They're like, "Wait a minute! I thought there was no hierarchy. You sure seem to be sure seem to be pushing this dogma about non-dogmatism on us." And I mean, it's all of these complexities where the person that says no, it's the poetic. And that's again, I think, part of what happens in Christianity. Okay, if you live by the sword, you die by the sword. If you live by the poetic, you die by the poetic. And so, in some ways, I love your point, Roy, because what you have to do is be willing to take that risk to bring it into the room, but there's no guarantee, which is why we currently are having this. Someone has brought another spirit into the culture that says, never apologize, never show your weakness. It's like, I understand that can be a very powerful negotiating tool, but that's a different spirit you bring into the room, and that spirit has its own consequences. And so I think it's helpful to understand the way these spirits move and the power we have with these spirits and usually, again, they're spirits of invitation. One of the interesting things that you really start to get into the demonic when humans try to control spirits rather than when humans sort of begin to say, let's invite this spirit into this place and see if others will join in with this spirit with us. Does that make you nervous, Grizz? All this, you had some pretty big exorcism stuff on your channel the other day.
No, they don't make me nervous. Every knee shall bow. But I don't know how long do these go, though. I'm reaching my personal limits of camera.
Yeah, I know. No, we're just going to have our final thoughts round, and then I'm going to drop the link. And I want to thank each of you for participating in this and for picking up on this. Those who don't know kind of how I do this, if you're in the membership section, I'll usually drop a little post in the membership section. I have another special hierarchy list of invitees of OG regulars that I also send the list out sometimes, because it's usually not until sort of midweek if I'll have the time on Friday to do this. So that's why it's always so last minute. But I love having the randoed element to this where we get to see some new faces and some new voices. So special, again, thanks to Roy and to Terry and to Justin for, coming into this and kind of playing for the first time here. So takeaways from... Go ahead, Grizz.
Oh, I just said, and wearing a great hat.
And wearing a great hat. My hat. So takeaways.
When I was... Oh, sorry. When we're in London, me and Harris Ups were wearing this hat, and Paul said he had FOMO.
I did. I didn't bring mine to Europe. Yeah. I packed very carefully. I only had room for one hat, and I needed to go with something warm because England has terrible weather. So takeaways from today's conversation.
Also, I was a bit nervous about this. I'm not a very public-facing person, and I get carried away with talking sometimes, and I was a bit nervous. And I realise now that I didn't need to be. I'm very relaxed, and I think it's been wonderful. It's been really interesting to, I tried to put out an idea, and I think Shari grasped what I was doing. I'm kind of, what's behind the story? Like, what's the shape of it? What's the understanding behind it? And I crafted a story, and I wasn't sure because I've only told it to myself up to this point, in this form. But no, it's been. I think I love Estuary, Paul. I've said this to you. I think it's marvelous. It's an on-ramp for community building. That's what it is. It's really simple and it's elegant and it's truthful, and I think it's really finding its feet. With you doing these Friday live streams and bringing different people in, people are getting into it, and it's obvious. when you look at it and you see what's unfurling, this is working. We're all kind of resonating on the same idea, which is really powerful. So thank you to you for that, and John.
Well, thank you for being here. Actually, with your grandmother's stories, we had a couple of people from. I do this all the time.
Yeah.
I don't know why. Now I know why I do this. We had a couple of we had a couple of women from when she was a rando on the channel a few times, and they came in for our Sunday morning estuary, and we have one woman in our estuary who she always starts, I'm not going to pitch anything, I'm not going to talk today, she always says that, but she tells you you made your grandmother's stories remind me of her story. She grew up in the South during the Jim Crow years, and she's just such a lovely person. She'll never watch anything on YouTube, so I can talk about her. I can really celebrate her on YouTube. But she's kind of shy. She kind of quit. But every now and then a light will go on, and she'll tell a story from her childhood. And so these two women that came on Sunday, they were just riveted by listening to her talk about we have this stereotype of, if you were African American in the Jim Crow South, it was horrible during Jim Crow. Yeah, it was. But also there was a beauty in these little communities, and they all looked at, they had no services, they had no money. And so I think about Grim Grizz often when I hear her stories, because, they didn't have anything, but they had each other. And so in some ways, what they had from each other was far more than what the government could give. And so it's all of these strange trade-offs.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Anybody will tell you this who knows me. I constantly talk about my grandparents because they were so influential. But I think my grandfather used to talk about the eternal procession of the priest, the sadhu, the shaman, and the sensei. And it's this eternal procession of understanding. And I think we owe it to our forefathers to remember them and to convene with them and tell their stories, I think this is part of it, the eternal procession of humanity, that we tell these stories and keep them alive. Christianity is an example of this, and I think it's what we do. It's very human. It's campfire, I just, thanks God for being here.
All right, thank you. Any other takeaways from today before I drop the link? And any of you are free to go if you wish. You're able to stay. You never know what's going to come through that link when I drop it. So I just have to warn you. There are. Go ahead, Sherry.
I just wanted to say how much of a pleasure it was to be with all of you today. It was really great. It was nice to meet you, Terry and Roy, and Justin, and Grizz. I got to meet Grizz.
I can't wait to see the in-person you again, Sherry.
Oh, yeah, me too. Are you going to be there at North
Lord
Carolina?
willing.
Okay, good. Yeah, and I was just also going to say that I hate to inform the staff that I'm never going to back down on my importance of context and story and the mystery of the person. I realize that a lot of people that frightens them. It's like going out to sea in a boat with no rudder, and but we are floating in a world of information, and it's only going to intensify. And if we don't stop to number one, find out the stories of others around us, and also understand the story that we're in, we are more at sea without a rudder. Like we literally are then at sea without a rudder. I often think of the verse that says that, we will be blown about by every wind of doctrine. And I when I was younger, I didn't really see that, but man, do I see it now. It's crazy.
That's true.
My closing thought is get yourself some estuary. It's like a key party from the 1970s, but